Chapter 31. How much sand is in this hourglass? It was torture, waiting there at the lodge for the night to finally be over. Using the boys' sleeping area, which was larger than the girls', they laid out all the injured and unconscious. Jiro was among them. Her arm was really hurting now. She'd taken off her jumper, Siren now resting on a pillow beside her, and her arm had been wrapped in a sling that Mr. Aizawa had strung up the moment he returned. Looking around, she could see far too many of Class B, fast asleep without poison in their veins. But not everyone had returned yet, or been returned. Jiro hated to think that some of them still lay somewhere in the forest as the fire raged on around them. She really hoped Canary was okay, and the others too. But she had left him behind. Well, he left her behind, technically. She had run back to camp after helping Canary deliver their messages to Mandalay. There was no way she could have been able to stop him. It was clear that when his mind became set on something, there was no turning back. Mr. Aizawa had just arrived again, carrying another unconscious student over to an unoccupied bed. Because Class 1B were all in the forest when the gas started, nearly all of them fell under its grips. The new arrival was Tetsu, but he was conscious, just injured, like Jiro, and so was placed on her side of the room. What happened? Jiro questioned, as Tetsu was laid down in the bed to her right. Shot, he grumbled. That bastard gas villain pulled a gun on me. Her breath hitched. It was lucky that it had been Tetsu. Anyone else would have been killed. He was bulletproof. Who else is back? Pressed Jiro. She felt out of the loop, stuck in this makeshift infirmary. Kendo from Class B, Mr. Aizawa explained for Tetsu. The two of them defeated the— Mr. Aizawa! Jiro turned her head to see Uraraka in the doorway, breathing heavily. Shikashitsusu and Kodai standing just behind her. Uraraka, what's wrong? Her teacher asked, quickly getting to his feet. It's Shinso, she stammered. We can't get him to leave the forest. Dove, Jiro moaned. Dove, where's Canary? Have you seen him? She didn't reply. Why didn't she reply? Lead me to him, Mr. Aizawa ordered, charging out of the room behind Uraraka and Asui. Kodai was the only one who stayed. Kodai, Jiro called out. The shy girl hurried over to her, after glancing at all her fallen friends. Sup, Kodai, Tetsu said. You're uninjured. That's good. She nodded, clearly holding back tears. Sorry, Kendo and I just left you with Shizaki and Honeku, but they got back before you with Shishida, apparently. Where were you? She sniffed daintily, her eyes now settling on the sleeping bird at Jiro's side. Jiro's eyes flickered between them. Were you with Canary? She guessed, pulling herself up into a sitting position, cradling her arm despite it being in a sling anyway. Tears started spilling down Kodai's face as she nodded, and Jiro's heart plummeted. If Kodai was back and Canary wasn't— wait, no. If he was hurt, then he would have been taken right here. Then why was he missing? Perhaps he was with Shinso, or Raka said something was wrong with him. We can't get him to leave the forest. Kodai, what happened? Jiro demanded. She was standing up now, pain numbed by the panic that plagued her. What happened? Kodai just buried her face in her hands, shaking her head as she whimpered. Jiro wouldn't be getting an answer out of her anytime soon. So, after not much thought, she scooped up Siren and hurried past, jogging through the door. She didn't know how long it had been since the attack was over, or if there were still villains roaming the woods. But there were all sorts of police vehicles here now. The blares of different sirens indicated the arrival of ambulances. Villain detainment facilities were already being filled. But Jiro wasn't focused on that. Not even the maddening roars of the villain she and Canary had defeated earlier, as he was hauled away, could distract her. Jiro! It was Kaminari, hurrying over, alongside Kirishima and Mina. You're awake! Jiro hadn't even realized she'd passed out. Where is everyone? Jiro croaked. She knew the answer, for the most part. She asked it anyway. Nearly everyone's back now, Kirishima explained, eyeing the little bird in her hands for only a moment. Shoji took Hajikure back. I think she was the only one out of Class A who passed out because of the gas. Most of Class B did, though. The only ones who made it out unscathed were Kendo, Kodai, the mushroom girl, the pony one, oh, and that beast guy. I can't remember their names. I just saw Tetsu. How is he? He'll be fine, Jiro insisted. Where's Canary? Canary? Mina repeated. I thought he went into the forest with you. That's what Ida said. He did, Jiro affirmed. We got separated. Kodai was with him, but she's not saying anything to me. Do you have any idea why he's not— Hey! They quickly turned around, only for their eyes to rest on the sight of another Class B student, the one with the blue and white headband, charging from the depths of the woodland as fast as he could go. Hey! He cried again. Quickly! She's hurt! Momo! Jiro yelled, charging forwards. There was Yaoyorzo, seemingly attached to the boy's back. Kirishima grabbed her good arm before she could get any further, and a group of paramedics swarmed the two. She could only watch from a distance, still straining against Kirishima's hold, her free hand shaking and struggling not to drop the Canary, as one of her closest friends was laid out on a stretcher and carried into the ambulance, out of sight. The Class B boy hung back a little. He got a few supportive pats from the paramedic staff, but he seemed rather uninjured himself, other than a suspicious red stain on his headband of his. Jiro didn't think it was his blood. He caught eye contact with them, and quickly hurried away from the paramedics who were keen to check over any hidden injuries. Is everyone else back? Are they okay? He practically demanded as soon as he caught his breath. We don't know, Mina replied honestly, her big black eyes filled with worry, and likely tears too. But you're the last of Class B. It's just a group of our friends who is missing. Tetsu's the only one injured, Kirishima told him helpfully, finally letting go of Jiro. But a lot of the others were knocked out by the gas. I'm sorry, man. The boy just nodded, staring blankly at the ground for a while. I thought I was a real goner there, he stammered eventually. I was with Yaoyorzo, handing out gas masks and trying to find the rest of my class, when this huge freaking monster started chasing after us. But then, when I thought it was about to cut my head off with a chainsaw coming out of its hand, he just stopped. Yaoyorzo made me attach this button thing to him as he walked off. I think it was a tracker. But she was hit pretty badly around the head, so she hasn't been very responsive. Wait, was it a Nomu? Canary frowned. Like that monster at the USJ? He said, turning to the others for their agreement. I don't know, he sighed. But I'm so freaking glad it went when it did. Do you have any idea why? The Nomu at the USG was like a mindless beast, Jiro recalled, and only answered to the lead villain. Maybe the same thing goes here. It might have stopped because its master told it to. But why would they do that? The headband boy questioned. I thought they wanted to kill us. They must have completed their mission, Kirishima concluded. Wait, that means they got that Kachan guy, or girl. Wasn't that someone from your class, Awas? No, the boy, Awas, frowned. I didn't recognize the name, so I thought they were one of yours. Jiro's eyes widened. Oh no, she murmured. The others turned to her in a panic. What is it? Do you know something? Mina demanded, placing her hand gingerly on Jiro's shoulder. I was the one who delivered that message to Mandalay. With Canary, she looked to Kirishima. Kachan is what Canary called Bakugo. Silence fell among them. Is Bakugo back yet? Awas whispered, breaking the tense atmosphere for only a moment. Jiro gulped. Uraka and Sue took Mr. Aizawa back in the forest to help with Shinso. Other than them, we're still missing Bakugo, Aoyama, Todoroki, Tokiyame, and Canary. She trailed off as she stared at the dark forest looming over them. Mr. Aizawa had just reappeared. He sprinted from the path, his black boots colliding heavily with the earth as he rushed towards the ambulance containing Yaoyorzo. There was someone in his arms, hanging limp and unconscious. Jiro saw a tuft of indigo hair. Was that Shinso? Kaminari pointed out, straining to get a better look. Are any of you kids injured? A paramedic suddenly questioned, almost appearing out of thin air at Mina's side. Her eyes settled on Jiro's sling. Come on, let's get you properly checked over. Wait, Jiro stammered. She gazed back at the arriving group, wandering towards them. Everyone was there, but not Bakugo and Canary. It was only when Jiro saw the little handful of iced tears in Todoroki's palm, a collection that was slowly building, she had a horrible recollection. I'm not supposed to kill you myself, the muscular villain had said, but no one said anything about the other two. Come on, let's have some fun. Before you die, though, maybe you could help me out? I still have a job to do after all. I'm looking for another kid named Bakugo. Seen him around? Where's Canary? She whispered. A question she had asked far too many times now. A question she knew the answer to, but still refused to believe. The arriving group looked to her, eyes full of sorrow. And Bakugo, added Kirishima. Where is he? Jiro exclaimed. Where are they? Gone, said Todoroki, simply, dropping the ice onto the ground. Gone? Mina repeated, raising her hands to her mouth. What happened? Jiro screamed, tears straining down her face and blurring her vision. The villains. They took both of them, Sue exclaimed, hiccuping on her little ribbit at the end of her announcement. Uraraka gazed at her with watery eyes, choking on her words as she said, They're gone, Jiro. As Jiro was gently pulled away by the paramedic, she could see nothing, feel not the pain of her arm, but only the soft tickle of Siren's limp wings. She could hear it all, the blare of the sirens, the sound of the water planes, trying to put out the raging fire in the dry summer forest, an approaching helicopter to take away the critically injured. Shinso's sobs as he regained consciousness, the wails of her other classmates as they too came to the profound realization that the heroes did not always win. She didn't hear her own screams. This time, the villains had been victorious. But what exactly had they won? One day since the kidnapping. Aozora tapped her pen against her lip nervously, pacing back and forth across the waiting room outside the studio. Something wasn't right here. Not at all. President Mike had practically run from the studio only a few hours prior, phone in his hand, shouting as he went that it was an emergency and he wouldn't be able to host his show for the remainder of the day, at the very least. Sidekick, Minim, had been more than happy to step in his shoes. She was happily chatting away about whatever the heck it was, ever oblivious to the reason as to why she was doing far more than usual that day. What Aozora didn't like is that she didn't know either. She was waiting for a phone call. President Mike had said she'd inform her of what happened in due course. They'd be the first media company to announce whatever it was to the rest of Japan once more. Aozora supposed it was because President Mike was a reliable outlet for UA. But it was far too early in the morning for this. The sun had barely risen yet. Here she was. She supposed it wasn't that different from any other day. She was there as early as ever. The only difference was that she knew something was amiss, and she hated not being in the know. That was when her phone started to buzz in her hand. In the suddenness of the situation, she fumbled with the device, juggling it between her hands in an effort not to drop it and finally make contact with the answer button. Hello? She stammered, knocking her headphones off her head and bringing the phone close to her ear. She barely acknowledged that she hadn't checked the caller ID. It could have been a spam call for all she knew, maybe telling her about something stupid like double glazed windows or car insurance, despite the fact that she never actually passed her driving test. Apparently, using her quirk to scare off irritatingly slow drivers in their mirrors wasn't allowed. She didn't bother taking it twice. It was too much of a waste of her time. Aozora, Kokisha just finished up with her report. She should be on her way back now. Sorry I took so long. It's President Mike. But something was really wrong here. Really wrong. The enthusiasm was gone from his voice, every drop of emotion drained. Not even his calming, it's gonna be alright tone was present now. It was like he'd been infested with the Borodaizawa disease or something. What happened? She demanded, putting the phone on speaker so she could shout into the microphone. Tell me what happened. You haven't been this freaked out since Canary decided to beat up the hero killer of all people. And even then you didn't go running out of the studio like some kind of, I don't know. I can't even make a good enough simile. That's what it has come to. He didn't even laugh. Look, there's been... President Mike sighed, hesitating as he struggled to think of a way to explain this. Or, at least, that's what Aozora assumed he was doing. That was until she listened a little closer and heard a distant sniffling sound. Are you crying? Canary's gone, Aozora, he exclaimed. Gone! The League of Villains attacked our summer camp and they took Midoriya. It could have been the news itself that broke Aozora. It could have been the sound of the seemingly indestructible hero that she had looked up to ever since she first met him, dropping his phone to the ground and sobbing hysterically. It could have been the sight of that little armchair in front of her, still covered in pillows and a big fluffy green blanket that Aozora had recently tossed over it from her own home, purely because she was incredibly keen to see him wrap himself up in it like a burrito. Canary's little nest. Maybe it was the thought of a little shy little boy who wandered into the radio studio, of what he became, of where he could possibly be now. Aozora was shaking as she lowered herself into that armchair. There were feathers stuck in the back of the pillow she reached for and clutched onto for dear life, burying her face into it as she sobbed. Her little fledgling. When would he fly again? 2 days since the kidnapping. Consciousness returned to Shinso in waves. He blinked and day turned into night, the clock on the wall counting by the seconds. He blinked again, and the sun had returned. His eyes felt heavier than they had ever been. He was sure that the skin beneath them had sunk deeper into the eye sockets of his skull since the attack. They were already such a prominent feature of his expression. Now, he looked and felt like death. The fact that he hadn't had the energy to do his hair didn't help. It just hung down partially over his face like Mr. Aizawa's often did. Messy. Like Midoriya's, but longer. Everything hurt. His arms were covered in thick bandages, concealing burns and the creams and lotions that covered them. His side had been stitched up, and was also wrapped in a few layers of dressings that had to be replaced as often as the ones on his arms. His shoulder, too, had suffered a similar fate to his side. But none of that hurt as much as the weight hanging in his heart, infesting his mind. Midoriya had been right there, just out of reach. So close, yet so far. Don't cry. Shinso let his eyes open once more. He turned to his left, and there was Jiro, sitting in a chair at his bedside. Gazing around the room, his gaze rested on each of his friends in turn. They were all here. Jiro, Todoroki, Uraraka, and Ida. They stared at him in a way that indicated that they'd been here for a while, sitting in the silence. Shut up, Shinso hissed at Jiro, squinting as more tears fell from his eyes, no matter how hard he tried to stop them. Okay, was all Jiro said. And so, she did. Shinso caved to his stupid emotions quickly, sobbing silently as he was sure the others were doing so too. There was a little voice in the back of his head. It sounded suspiciously like Midoriya, that told him that crying was a natural way of removing toxins from his body. Midoriya probably said that at some point, maybe even on the radio show. Wait. His necklace. He wasn't wearing it. With his tears all but gone, his store completely dry, he sat bolt upright, despite the protests of his aching body. Where is it? He demanded, shakily, reaching for the place where the feather should be lying on his chest. Where is my... It was there, on the nightstand by his bed. With a trembling hand he reached out for it, fumbling with the clasp as he put it back around his neck. Did Canary give that to you? Uraraka questioned, shuffling a little closer with her chair. Shinso nodded glumly, rubbing the delicate thing between his fingers. It was remarkable how intact the feather persisted to be, despite being through so much. There was still the occasional tear across the vein, but it was still a tough little thing, just like where it came from. How's Siren? Shinso asked after a moment, finally letting his eyes look away from the feather pendant and back towards the others. He was right. They had been crying too. She's still at the veterinarian's, Ida replied, rubbing the mist from his glasses with the hem of his shirt. No one has woken up from the gas yet. Siren will prove to take even longer than our fellow Hero Course students. Shinso's mind mulled over the phrase fellow Hero Course students for a little while. He didn't really want to think about it more than that. Who else was hurt? Jiro raised her hand slightly. Recovery Girl patched me up pretty easily, though, she admitted with a shrug. I was released from the hospital yesterday afternoon. Other than that, most of us had minor injuries, Uraraka explained, rubbing at her arm where she had been nicked by that villain with the knives. Excluding Yeo Yorzo and Tetsu, everyone else in the hospital are here because of the poison. What happened to them? Shinso continued to interrogate, not wanting to let his thoughts gravitate back to that pit of sorrow and remorse. Yeo Yorzo and Tetsu, I mean. Yeo Yorzo was badly hurt by a Nomu, Ida explained, whilst Tetsu was shot several times by the villain who produced the poisonous gas. His quirk protected him against most of the blows, but he wasn't strong enough to hold against too many. He left the hospital not long after me, actually, Jiro continued. That sounded a lot worse than it actually was. Yeo Yorzo is still here, though. She's being released tomorrow evening, as everything's still okay by them. He'll probably be let out around then, too. Silence fell over them once again. Shinso couldn't help it. He just couldn't keep his thoughts away from it. "What now?" were the words he forced from his throat. No one replied immediately. "We wait," said Ida. "For what?" Shinso snapped, coupling his sheets up in one fist whilst the other continued to hold the feather around his neck. "For them to kill him?" Jiro flinched at the words, grasping her earphone jacks and tapping them together nervously. We don't know that's what they want." "Well, what else would they want from them?" he exclaimed, almost demanding an answer that wasn't the worst possible scenario. "Kidnap and murder one of the most famous budding heroes around? It's a way to make a statement, that's for sure." But they took Bakugo too," Uraraka reminded him. "If that's all they wanted, they wouldn't have any point in taking them both." Shinso shrugged. "Make a bigger impact, maybe? Bakugo was the one who won the sports festival, remember?" "The heroes will save them," Todoroki interjected. He hadn't spoken much. Shinso almost forgot he was there. "How can you be so sure?" retorted Shinso, before gazing back towards the clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock. "How do you know they aren't already too late?" he added. They were staring at that clock now. Every second that passed was a second lost. The chances of their friend returning in one piece were continuing to dwindle. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Todoroki turned from the clock to the window. "We can only hope. Midoriya was out there, somewhere. But where?" Consciousness returned to Midoriya slowly, yet abruptly at the same time. He remembered little of what happened after he was pulled through the portal. All he could be sure about was that, right now, he was hanging limp in a chair, his body held in that position by something that tugged at his ankles and wrists. He didn't dare open his eyes quite yet. He needed to process what had happened to him first, from the bits and pieces of his surviving memory. They were walking through the forest, when they came across Uraraka and Asui. There was the villain there, a girl about his age with wild yellow eyes and messy blonde hair. She was rather frightening, but seemingly enthralled with him. She dashed at him, which is when Kodai resized her tree and batted the villain away with startling strength. There was a cold touch to his shoulder, and everything went black. Seemingly no time passed at all before he was standing in a completely different part of the forest. His friends were there. Shinto looked worse than Jiro had, his side red, sleeves ragged and ruined, revealing angry burns underneath. There was a knife in his shoulder, but he didn't seem to care. He reached out for Midoriya anyway, but someone else was there too, one hand around his neck and the other holding his mouth close. His hands were hot, and judging by the flames that persisted to burn the ground beneath his feet, were the source of that power. There was a rush of air and a sudden change of temperature, but his eyes never drifted further than the violet of what seemed to be a portal before something happened. It could have been a drug, possibly a blow to the head, maybe even a quirk, but either way, he had passed out. And now he was here. Where was here? "Come on, don't you want to eat something? I'll have it for you." "Back off." Midoriya carefully opened his eyes, making sure not to draw attention to himself in the process. It was dark. The room was small, cramped. It seemed to be some kind of bar. Wooden floorboards covered in rather suspicious stains, a red brick wall decorated scarcely by torn All Might posters, and a rather large TV screen. But there were no windows, but two doors. One was behind the bar, to his right, whilst the other was to his left, seemingly the main exit. But it was what was directly in front of him that grasped his attention the most. There was Kachan. He was bound to a chair. His hands weren't behind his back like Midoriya's were, though, attached to wooden slants. His were instead trapped within what looked like a large lump of metal, his arms and leg cuffed to the more robust chair. Midoriya supposed that Bakugo's quirk was harder to keep under control than his own was. All they had to do with him was shove a foul-tasting gag in his mouth. There were 2 layers of fabric, he noticed, one limiting his speech and the other covering the bottom half of his face entirely. "You haven't eaten in 2 days, another voice grumbled. It was the scarred villain that had taken him, with the blue fire quirk. He was perched on a bar stool that was not far from Midoriya, observing the scene of the first villain attempting to get Kachan to eat. "Twice. Just let him starve." "What? No way!" "Sure. That makes things easier for me." "If you want water, just say," the scared man added, turning back around in his stool to return to whatever was in his drink. when he caught Midoriya's eyes. He snapped them shut immediately, but too late, the damage was done. He heard footsteps before his head was suddenly yanked back. Midoriya didn't bother keeping his eyes closed. The villain grinned at him when he opened them again. He had a fistful of Midoriya's hair, holding his head upright from the limp position it had been hanging in for who knows how long. He had left painful aches in his neck, but that was the least of his concerns. "Took you long enough," the fire user snarled. "We thought you'd overused your quirk in training or something. Bakugo's tranquilizer didn't keep him under for that long." There was a loud gasp from across the bar. "Canary!" a voice squealed. "Dabi! Is he awake? He's awake!" The scarred villain, Dabi, let go of Midoriya's hair so he could fall further back into the chair. He took a step back as the owner of that excitable voice from earlier skipped into view. It was the girl that Kodai attacked at summer camp. "Hi, Canary," she said again, practically bouncing up and down. "I'm Himeki Toga, and I'm your biggest fan." It wasn't possible for Midoriya to shrink back any further. Instead, he pulled at his bindings in a poor attempt to loosen them. "I saw you in the sports festival, and I've listened to all your radio shows," she continued to babble on. As she gushed over him, Midoriya slowly turned his gaze to Kachan. His head was held low. He glared back at Midoriya from the tops of his eyes, but there was a certain emotion in them, something Midoriya never thought he'd see. A strange mixture of worry and fear. It seemed to be something he was trying to suppress. Midoriya wasn't doing as well as him. He strained desperately against the bonds once more, his breathing fast and erratic. Toga had a knife now. He didn't recall when or where she'd gotten it from, but Midoriya froze when she decided to hold it against him. "Just a little blood," she said with a slight giggle. "Then I can be just like you." "Back off, Toga," Dabi sighed. "You already collected what you needed from both of them." "Oh, but he's so pretty when he bleeds." "Can't deal with this cycle tonight," Dabi suddenly proclaimed, leaping off the bar stool and marching towards the door. "I'll be back before that stupid press conference." "Wait, Shigaraki said to wait here and watch them. You're supposed to be the one in charge," persisted the lizard-like villain, dressed similarly to Stain. The realization only made Midoriya panic further. "I'm not a babysitter," growled Dabi. He said nothing more, before opening the door and slamming it shut behind him, sending in a draft of cold air, a tantalizing taste of freedom, just out of reach. "He shouldn't be going outside like that so often," sighed one of the other villains. Midoriya wasn't paying much attention to who was who at the time. "He's too recognizable. He'll get us noticed." "Don't be ridiculous, Mang. What a good idea. Let's go. You go." "Twice. Go take a timeout." "No, ma'am. Yes, ma'am." "We should keep to Shigaraki's orders," continued the lizard villain. "Put them back under as soon as we're done." Midoriya flinched at that, unsure of what he could possibly be implying. "We'll have to take off his gag to give him water, though," said a masked man wearing a top hat. "What if he uses his quirk?" "He won't." There was now a glass of water held before him by the villain, Mang. She pulled at his gag. It came undone with some difficulty. As soon as he were free, he gasped for the murky air of the bar, but Toga's knife was back at his neck again in mere seconds. He leaned away from it, unsure of what he could possibly do in this situation. "The press conference is tomorrow," announced the lizard villain. He still hadn't left his position in the far corner of the bar, leaning against the wall and gazing at the muted television on the wall. Midoriya could see his face on it, next to the disgruntled expression of Kashan's when he received his gold medal, seemingly eons ago now. "They don't need to eat. They'll be fine until then." "Exactly my point," Mang affirmed, dusting the glass of water closer to Midoriya's face. He gulped, his throat rough and sore from overuse during the summer training camp, but he didn't accept the water. What do you want from me?" he managed, painfully aware of the threat of the blade against his skin and the panicked cries of his terrified mind. "You'll find out soon enough. It's a matter of time and presentation," the masked villain informed him menacingly. "Deku!" Everyone turned and stared. "Don't take the water," Kachan finished. Mang just tutted exasperatingly. She pushed the water closer to Midoriya's face. "Take it, or we use one of Toga's needles." Midoriya's eyes flickered between Kachan and the villains. After a moment, he caved, and opened his mouth slightly. The glass was thrust harshly against his jaw, clashing with his teeth as the drugged liquid was forced down. He was so desperate for the water that he didn't even consider refusing to swallow. "See? Look, that wasn't so hard," the villain sighed, turning to Bakugo and indicating at the empty glass. Don't forget to gag him up so he doesn't sing when he wakes up. Why don't you do it then, Spinner? You've done nothing to help this entire time. I still don't see why this one's even here. He is the one who hindered Stain's mission to begin with. We should put him down, not keep him like some kind of pet. Pet Canary! Oh, can we? All their voices were merging into one as Midoriya's head grew heavy, his eyelids drooping. Whatever had been in that water, it acted quickly. He succumbed to sleep easily, hoping, praying, that the heroes would find them soon. But how much longer? 3 days since the kidnapping. I don't see why you're all here, Shinso sighed, averting his gaze from the crowd of students that had invaded his hospital room. Because we're worried about you, Uraraka told him fondly. You haven't answered any of our messages or spoken to anyone. Oh, I barely know any of you, he snapped, glaring back at Class 1A. So, you stuck with us now? Jiro managed to smile. You're in the hero course, after all. He wavered for a moment. So was Canary. That put a damper on their smiles. That had always been one of the things he hated mainstream heroes for. Their smiles. They grinned like everything was going to be okay. Like they were oblivious to the dangers of the situation at hand. Or perhaps lying without remorse. You shouldn't be talking about him in past tense, man, said the redhead, Kirishima. Shinso believed his name. Why shouldn't I? Shinso retorted. He's as good as dead, gone for 3 days, and we still haven't heard a word from the heroes. They're holding a press conference tonight, Ida interjected, his voice cracking as he did so. Mr. Aizawa will be attending, alongside Principal Nedzu and King. Whatever, Shinso sighed. It won't make a difference. There's no point in being so pessimistic, Jiro insisted, twirling her ox cords around her finger, as if trying to distract herself from her emotions. You should always be pessimistic, Shinso replied, hugging his knees. That way, you'll either be right about the outcome, or won't have to feel the pain of being wrong. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Shinso felt like he was drowning in it. You should always be optimistic, Uraraka's voice cut through the quiet. Because that way, if worst comes to worst, you'll only have to feel that pain once. He sighed and let go of his legs, refusing to meet her gaze, again. No one talked for a moment more, as if unsure of what to say. But then, something happened that Shinso hadn't expected at all. And let's make sure that doesn't happen. Shinso frowned at Kirishima's proclamation. And how would we do that? We go after them ourselves, he announced. Shinso's eyes grew wide. What? Ida exclaimed. Are you crazy? Wait, hear me out, he protested. I was here yesterday, and Todoroki was too. I was going to see Tetsu, and I think Todoroki was going to see you. I was gonna come too. But then we ended up seeing Yoyozo talking to All Might and some police officer. She said that she had managed to attach a tracking device onto Nomu that attacked her and a waste from Class B. She gave a receiver to them. And you're gonna ask her for another one, Ida concluded, aren't you? You want to track down that monster back to the villain's base? Shinso breathed. Todoroki hesitated, before giving a determined nod. What are you thinking? Was Ida's sudden outburst. We should leave this to the professionals. Don't you remember the trouble Hosu brought? The consequences don't matter, Todoroki continued through gritted teeth. Don't you see? They could be dead if we don't act soon. During the attack, Jiro interjected. The villain said that they were specifically told not to harm Canary and Bakugo, but they tried to kill a good majority of the rest of us. Surely, they want something more from the two of them than just to get rid of them? It was a good point. It lit a strange spark in the void that Shinso had let his mind sink into. Then what do they want? He posed the question. She stammered. I don't know. Well, I, for one, don't want to wait to find out, Kirishima stated. So, how about it? They're still within our reach. We can save them. Why won't you listen to me? Ida cried, making everyone have jump a little and take a few steps back. You get yourselves hurt more than you already have. Ruin UA's reputation more than it already has been. You can make things even worse. Maybe you're right, Kirishima yelled, balling his fist in frustration, tears at the corner of his eyes. But all I know is that when I was at the summer camp, I couldn't do anything. Whilst you were out there risking your lives, when I heard someone, my friend, even though I didn't quite understand it was him, was in danger, I stood by and waited. And I couldn't bear to just keep doing that. If the villains aren't going to kill them, what are they doing instead? Holding them hostage? Trying to use them to do something? Torturing them? You expect me to just sit here while something like that could be happening to one of my best friends? Canary is fragile, Shinso interrupted, before Ida could scream at them some more. He always has been. I don't know how much he could take. You underestimate him, Jiro insisted. He's got a powerful quirk, and a quirk that is easily countered, protested Shinso, raising his hand to his lips. And that's not what I was talking about. Then come on, Kirishima cried, holding out a hand to Shinso as he sat there in the hospital bed. We might still have time. Time. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. But how much more?